Yes, it is. It might be nice to let us know when or what the main reason is, what you hope to learn tonight. What's the main thing that you're hoping to take away tonight? Good. Okay, I think we're going to get going. So, my name is John Hall, and I'm the Executive Director at Mission Central. And I'd like to welcome all of you here tonight to this seminar, 3 Ways You Can Welcome Refugee Claimants in a Post-Pandemic World. And the 3 agencies that are working together are Journey Home Community, Kimbrace Community, and Inasmuch Community, and they're all local to Vancouver. But the information that we're going to share tonight and communicate is relevant for right across Canada. In fact, a lot of the resources that have been gathered together that we're going to send to you are appropriate for the whole country. So I hope that you take notes, but don't panic either, because we're going to be sending out a PDF with a lot of the information in it after the meeting tonight. Recording's also going to be available to everybody who is registered for this meeting, so we should be able to get a link out to that, a link to the recording out to you within about 2 weeks. This is just a really important topic, and Mission Central is pleased to be able to host this type of a seminar. And I just wanted to mention a couple of things about Mission Central. You, if you've been around the Vancouver area for a while, you're probably familiar that Mission Fest Vancouver changed its name to Mission Central. And now we're trying to serve the church all year long. And we do that through the website that we've developed, and we share content that we've developed, as well as content that mission agencies develop, articles, and of course we call people together for seminars like this, and then we do our 3 conferences under the Mission Central heading, and serve is most like Missions Fest. We also do a discipleship conference called Grow, and a creative arts conference called Create. And so we're going to be having Serve online again in January 2022, and you are all welcome to join us there. In the meantime, there's still a lot of ground to cover before we get to January 2022. And we'll be looking at relevant topics that we can introduce to you through seminars, and hopefully in-person seminars not too far down the road. So I want to pray for us before we dig in too deep, and then I'm going to pass things over to Brad from Journey Home. So let's pray. Father, I just thank you for this time together. I thank you that the refugee is on your heart, and I pray that tonight we will all find a way to be better equipped to serve those who are struggling, who are displaced, who are on the margins because of turmoil in the world around us. So Jesus, I pray that you would speak to our hearts and help us to take action. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So I'll turn things over to Brad. And
thank you, John. Appreciate that. And thank you for hosting this. And it's so great to see so many faces who are joining this seminar this evening. And it is encouraging to see people who, even though the 3 organizations that are hosting this event are on the West Coast, we're seeing people joining from other provinces. That is just so encouraging, and we're so excited about that. maybe if we can go to the next slide there, Richard. I want to just give you a little bit of a background in terms of why. Why are we even having this conversation today? When we talked to John at Mission Central about this seminar, we wanted to think through what would be helpful given the current context we're in as a nation and as a world. And so to help us understand that context, I wanted to just put up some stats and we'll start with that just to give a little bit of a picture. So um, in the last year, so the latest United Nations statistics on the number of displaced people around the world have just been released for 2020. And sorry, my stats are over there, so I might look over to my right here. But you'll see that from 2019 to 2020, the number increased by 3.5%. So there's more displaced people around the world than ever before in history. That's one piece of the puzzle in terms of context. And yet in Canada, because of COVID-19 and restrictions on travel and border closures, you can see that from 2019 to 2020, the number of refugee claimants, those who have entered Canada seeking protection, dropped by 63%. So there's a huge disconnect there in terms of more displaced people, and maybe we can conclude less people who are able to access safety and protection. And in the Canadian context, this is vastly a reduced number. And so wanted to highlight that. And then you can see even further, if the numbers continue the way they are, it could be even a greater decrease for 2021. So we're concerned about that because we believe that refugees who need protection have to be connected to that protection. And then just next slide, really quick. What does it mean for people who are stuck, who are displaced and need to get to safety? What is that life like for them? So you see the list there, things that refugee claimants, people on the refugee highway who are traveling or trying to travel to safety, they're in hiding and they are experiencing those things that you see on the screen. Trauma, they're living in hiding, they're stateless, they are unable to access the health care and the pandemic care that is needed during this time. They're vulnerable to people traffickers and sex trafficking. They're in really vulnerable situations. So that's the context that we wanted to present to you. And but there's a deeper reason why. We're engaging with churches and people who come from a Christian faith background on this seminar tonight. And we wanted to invite Mark Glanville to speak a little bit for us tonight. Mark he has a pastoral background and he's currently serving as the Associate Professor of Pastoral Theology at Regent College. And Mark, I appreciate you. You're a man who walks, you talk the talk, but you walk the talk too. And you're deeply committed to welcoming newcomers. You live your life that way, and I've always really respected that. And Mark and his brother recently have just published a book called Refuge Reimagined, Biblical Kinship in Global Politics. So Mark, love to hear from you on this topic.
Thank you so much, Brad. Well, I was thinking through, I have 12 minutes and I'm not going to bust my time. And I thought, how will I spend that time? And I think, we could go to those texts in the Old Testament and the New Testament that speak specifically about welcoming the stranger, and we will do that. But I think what I want to do in 12 minutes is to tell you the biblical story. Because sometimes I think we can hear a text here or a text there, like we're called to love the stranger, Deuteronomy chapter 10, for example, but it's disconnected from the whole. So let me just narrate the biblical story for you in 6 or 7 minutes. Let me put the gospel in the context of the whole biblical story, and then come back to some of those texts that perhaps you and I have heard about regarding welcoming the stranger, so that we can have a more substantial sort of discussion. So just bear with me then as we narrate the biblical story. Well, consider how it begins. Genesis chapter 1 and 2, is the creation event. And if you were to summarize Genesis 1 and 2, would be a theology. This world matters to God. This world matters to God. And if you were to take another step as you exegete Genesis 1 and 2, you would have to say that God has created a good world with care and delight. And that is very, very significant, that that's how the biblical story begins, that God has created a good world that God cares about and has created with care and delight. And you're going to see the significance of that in a minute, in about 5 minutes, when we get to the end of the story, Revelation 21:22, because you'll see that same theme reoccur. Well, you know what happens probably, or perhaps in Genesis chapter 3, which is sometimes called the fall, where because of sin, because of evil, human evil, there's not one part of God's good creation that isn't distorted by sin's curse, to speak in biblical terms, that somehow every part of the world is fractured, polluted, fragmented. Every part is beautiful in somehow, but every part is fragmented and polluted as well. When I think of my own heart, I can see the truth of both those sides of the coin. That God's good, creative, loving presence is there, and yet also things are also twisted and distorted. So we're tracking through the biblical story here. And let me come now, excuse me for jumping, to Genesis chapter 12, which is the call of Abraham. And in the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible, or the first half of the Bible, so to speak, God is forming a people, an ancient people, forming ancient Israel, to be a contrastive community around the nations, to be a place where every person flourishes, a people belonging to God. Well, you may remember the story that the ancient Hebrews were enslaved in ancient Egypt. It was not unusual in ancient times. It was actually corvée labor. It was enforced labor. And God, the great king, emancipated, rescued this enslaved nation and freed them to be God's people. You may recall that straight after that Exodus event, which, by the way, is a great divine act of social justice, really, God brought God's people to Sinai there in Exodus 20 to receive the law. Now, I'm not going to go into it here. I've written 2 books about it, but the law, the Old Testament law, there in the books of Exodus to Deuteronomy, is shaping ancient Israel to be a contrastive people, to be like a family, a community where every person can flourish. And here's the point: in total contradistinction to the oppression of Egypt. A place, the law is as much as saying when God's king, when God becomes king and God's ways come among a community, then everything is set right. And in God's presence, every person has a home and can flourish. I'll come back to the law and give you some detail in 5 minutes once we come to the end of the story. Well, can't do this, but I'm going to do it. If you just fast track through the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament, we see that unfortunately the people of God didn't live up to that beautiful vision for a place of flourishing for all. And there was syncretism and there was mess, and somehow the mess and the grittiness, they got lost in it. What happens when we come to the Gospels is by no means starting again, but Jesus comes as really regathering a renewed Israel. If you're familiar with the Gospel stories, that's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you might remember, for example, we go to lots of places, but the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5 to 7, rather. And God is gathering at the beginning of Matthew chapter 5, gathering a people. And in terms of the Old Testament, Jesus is literally gathering a end of days people of God, gathering a renewed Israel. And in the Sermon on the Mount, by the word of God, shaping this people. Blessed are the meek, blessed are the peacemakers, really calling Israel in some ways back to Torah, back to God, and somehow shaping this people around Jesus himself, his life and ministry. Very, very significantly, you come to the beginning of the book of Acts, and it's the early church now. And in Acts chapter 1 and 2, it's a fascinating turn. Because in Acts chapter 1 and 2, you actually expect, in biblical theology terms, the end. You have a resurrection. You have the coming of the Spirit, and actually we're in Jerusalem. And in biblical terms, that should mean the end of times has come. This is it. Now God is going to resurrect the whole world. But the surprise of Acts chapter 1 and 2 is that the end doesn't quite come. If you read Acts chapter 1, it's a time for witness. You will be my witnesses. Because the disciples say to Jesus in Acts chapter 1, is now the time you're going to bring the kingdom? And Jesus says, it's not for you to know the times. You will be my witnesses, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. You know that verse. And the Spirit is sent. What happens in Acts chapter 2 is this. It should be the end. But the end is pushed back for nothing less than a time of witness, for the people of God in Christ to live by our life, word, and deeds as a sign to God's restoring reign in Christ. What's important, well, the reason why I'm landing here for a moment is because Acts chapter 1 and 2 and the rest of the New Testament, it tells us what the purpose of this time in history is. The end has been pushed back for a time of witness by the power of the Spirit, Acts chapter 2. Let's just now, and we really shouldn't do this, just hopscotch to the end of the story. I'm sorry, but John only gave me 12 minutes. At the end of the story, Revelation 21 and 22, the end of the story is almost back to the beginning, but it's more. In Revelation 21:22, it's the renewed creation. That's not some other world up on Mars. That's not everyone going up to heaven. No, it's this world renewed. At the beginning, Genesis 1 and 2, the first two chapters, God made a good world with care and delight. And in the final two chapters of the Bible, this world is restored. Do you remember Revelation chapter 21? The New Jerusalem does what? Comes here. That's God's sovereign, saving, restoring rule coming here. Begins with creation, ends with creation. This is a period of mission. But what about the gospel? The gospel comes in the middle of that story. The gospel is God establishing in the world through Christ, securing the divine loving purposes for the world. Why? Because the gospel becomes in the middle of the story that begins with creation, ends with creation. And if you even take the time to search on this word gospel in the Pauline epistles and in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you see that the gospel is the culmination, the fulfillment of this beautiful Old Testament story that I narrated briefly. The gospel and the biblical story. Here's why I'm going there. Let me explain why, in 2 remaining minutes, why I told you the biblical story. It's because when we encounter these important texts, such as love the stranger, Deuteronomy 10, 18, 19. When we encounter, say, in Matthew, Mark, Luke, Jesus' beautiful fellowship meals, where Jesus brings the weakest to the center of community and really becomes family with them, embracing them as kin. Jesus is showing us up close and personal. And the law in Deuteronomy 10, 18 and 19, love the stranger, is showing up close and personal what God's desire is, what the Father's desire is for all of creation and for all of human community. Why? Because the biblical story is a story about the world. If I was to sum up the biblical story in one sentence, it'd have to be something like this. This is my Father's world, and broken and corrupted it may be, but it belongs to God. And in Christ the Father is busy recovering God's purposes for the creation. And that emphatically includes loving the stranger, Deuteronomy 10, 18, 19. We see that as Jesus enfolds his family, all the weakest there in first century Jewish society, all the inverted commas wrong people who in the kingdom of God become the most right people, brought to the center of the people of God, enfolded as family by Jesus, our Savior. In our book, Refuge Reimagined, we take the time, in our book, Refuge Reimagined, I get more than 12 minutes, just to say. But we take the time to walk through the whole biblical story and to show that in each point in the biblical story, there's this relentless ethic for bringing in the outsider, for enfolding the stranger, whether it's the Torah, the Old Testament law, whether it's the Gospels, whether it's even the Pauline epistles, though we don't do much work there in Refuge Reimagined. And so, as we journey together in this hour and a half webinar, we are seeking to follow in the footsteps of our Saviour, who enfolded those who are on the margins as his family. 11 minutes, 7 seconds, John.
John, you're muted, but I hear you. I can see you cheering.
Yeah, everybody should find the reaction button and give Mark a hand. That was amazing.
Yeah. Yes. Mark, thank you so much. Just helping us with the context. And what I loved about what you said is that vision of renewal and of including and of creating new family. And that's what we're talking about tonight is as refugee claimants may be arriving when the borders reopen, how can we do that well? And so we're going to keep talking about that. And I want to introduce my good friend Lauren. Lauren is the Director of Engagement at Kinbrace Community Society in Vancouver, BC. And Lauren, over to you.
Thanks, Brad. And good to be here with all of you. Thank you for joining us and really joining the people we don't see, and that's the refugee claimants who are out there somewhere and right around us, invisible. So I've been tasked with doing a quick overview of who are refugee claimants. There's a lot of terminology in the world of human migration, and figuring out who's who can be really helpful. And tonight we just want to highlight who are refugee claimants. So next slide, please. So Brad's already awakened us to this shocking reality of 82+ million forcibly displaced people. This is a staggering number. And to put it in context, in the last 10 years, this number has pretty much doubled. So we're in a situation on our planet that we need to be attentive to. And a country like Canada, we have capacity, we have heart, we have our own lived history. We need to be responsive. Of this 82 million, 48 million are internally displaced people. So these are folks who are still inside their countries of origin, but not at home, living in a different province, a different region. 30 million are refugees. These are people who are outside their countries of origin and have been determined by the UNHCR to need protection, but they're not durably settled themselves. They're kind of in limbo, so to speak. 4 million are asylum seekers. And these are people who are on the move, kind of this image you see in the picture here. Or if you have a memory back to the Syrian refugee situation, all the people sort of on the pathways towards Europe, those were asylum seekers. And in Canada, we call them refugee claimants. Next slide, please. So the opportunity that we have and that we want to extend is this movement from people who are left out, who are barbed wired out, who are barriered out, to that human embrace where people are welcomed and, as Mark said, brought to the center. Next message, slide, please. The word refugee is actually a legal definition, and it's not a very old definition. It was really coined and brought into a legal context after World War II. So a relatively new concept, not a new reality, because people have been displaced since the dawn of time. So this legal definition, a refugee is someone who is outside their country of origin. So you can't be a refugee in your own country, unable or unwilling to return to or seek protection within their country of origin. So there's a fear factor there, and it's real. And they're recognized and given protection because of persecution based on their religious belief, their political opinion, ethnicity, nationality, and or social group. So this is we call this a convention refugee, a person who is defined by this law made in 1951 by the UN, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And so that's a legal definition. Let's move to the next slide. An asylum seeker or a refugee claimant which is the topic of our discussion this evening. This is a person who's seeking protection, refugee protection, yet has not yet had their claim definitively evaluated. And we call these people refugee claimants once they're inside Canada. A mostly invisible population, and can be also very visible when they're crossing borders and they hit the news headlines, or when they arrive on a ship, as these brothers and sisters on the MV Sunsea in 2010 off of Canada's west coast. Next slide, please. Canada has, I would say, a choppy history, but a generally generous history of welcoming people who have lived or are living the refugee experience. And it's helpful to see it as two pathways into Canada. On the right-hand side, you have resettled refugees. These are people who are assisted by Canada's government assisted, or privately sponsored. And perhaps you are part of a church or have been connected to one where the citizens of Canada, through our denominations and other provisions, can personally get involved in sponsoring refugees. And then there's the blended visa, office referred, which is a fancy name for the government and citizens and the UNHCR working together. These people, resettled refugees on the right, are brought out of refugee camps generally, brought to Canada, met at the airport, and have a welcome package made to go, and a community of support to greet them. A significant welcome. The other pathway that Canada has open to people in need of protection are through the asylum process, the refugee claim process, the inland refugee protection. And these are the folks on the left of the screen. Refugee claimants are people on the move. They have taken their own initiative to come to a country like Canada. They're survivors, and they're motivated, and yet they're also traumatized. And we'll get into a little bit more of that later. So it's really important when you hear the word refugees, don't just swallow it hook, line, and sinker, because it's used fairly globally and not very accurately at times. It's helpful to kind of keep these distinctives. Next slide, please. This is the number of refugee claimants annually that have come into Canada starting in 2011. The numbers go back way into the 80s when they were first documented. But you can see and sort of this unusual, almost wave-like function that's happening here. 2013, the lowest year, those were dramatic changes in Canada's laws to providing protection for people. It's called refugee reform, and it just really narrowed the number of people who came in. And then you get this growth that's happening through the late 2000s, which is really in proportion in many ways to the increasing number of displaced people globally. And then 2020, you see that massive drop, and that is the pandemic. Borders closed, international travel shut down. So a huge impact. And that's why we're here tonight, because we're concerned about where is that remaining number of people, how can we position ourselves to welcome them. Next slide, please. Refugee claimants face multiple vulnerabilities. They face the vulnerabilities that Brad mentioned when they're outside of Canada, but they also face these vulnerabilities in Canada. Homelessness is chronic. The three organizations presenting this evening have their roots in providing that basic human need, housing. Isolation, loneliness, big issue. Trauma, both the trauma from their country of origin, the trauma of getting here, using people smugglers or traveling on false documents, huge amount of stress and taxation on their spirits. And then in Canada, also the trauma that happens here, a very complex refugee determination system. There's language and culture barriers, exploitation is rampant, lack of information, misinformation, and health barriers, accessing good health. So it's multiple vulnerabilities that refugee claimants face. That may be my last slide. Anything else there? What's the next slide? And that will inform.
It's to introduce Kocha.
Oh, well then there we go. So that gives an overview of refugee claimants. I'll pass it back to you, Brad.
Thank you, Lauren. And yeah, Lauren, I just appreciate how clearly you helped us understand kind of the who is a refugee. When we were planning, we knew that talking about who is a refugee is very much a definition, and that could create a lot of questions. It could create a lot of helpful things. But I'm really excited because one of my favorite people is here this evening. Her name is Kochar Saleh. And Kochar is a refugee claimant who arrived in Canada 5 years ago. And we got to know her at Journey Home Community, and she is really an amazing person. I would say because she has the lived experience, she is probably the expert in the room this evening. And so we're really privileged to have her. And every time I hear her speak, I come away feeling inspired and just really appreciate and respect you, Kochar, and what you bring in your storytelling. She is an author, she's a poet, and she's an advocate for women's rights. So you're going to hear about Kochar's story. And Kochar, welcome, and take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Brad, for introducing me in a beautiful way. Thanks for having me tonight. Hi, everyone. I'm Kochar, and I'm from Kurdistan, which is in between Iraq, Iran, Turkey, and Syria. We don't have country yet. And I'm from Iraq's part. I have been in Canada for 5 years, and I'm an author. I have 2 published books in my language, for sure. And also I'm a mom of 2 children, a son and a daughter, who still live in my area in Kurdistan. Before I escaped Kurdistan, I used to manage a published book company, and at the same time, I was running 3 programs at the radio. What I'm focusing in my writing is mostly freedom and human rights, especially women's rights and children's rights. As we know, in some countries, especially in Middle East, religion and society are a really big reason to take freedom from others, especially from women and children. That's something that I wanted to raise my voice and talk about. So for that reason, I threatened by fundamentalism Muslim a few times. So I had to leave the country twice before I come to Canada. I had to skip Kurdistan and went to Lebanon and stay there a few months, and I go back again. But 18 days before I leave Kurdistan for last time, I remember it was Ramadan, which is the month for fasting in Muslim religion. I had a TV interview and I talk about how bad it is when you force children to fast all day long without food and water. And of course, I was talking about fundamentalism Muslim and how society could affects our lives sometimes. The day after, I got lots of phone calls from friends and telling me to stay home, and I got threatened in most of the mosques in Kurdistan. And my social media was full of threatening messages. And I had to hide myself for 18 days in my work office. Meanwhile, I had to buy a United States visa, and I left Kurdistan. That was the hardest decision in my life. I couldn't believe that I am leaving my 2 children, my family, my home, my friends, my job, my memories and also myself behind. I landed in America in 2016, the end of 2016. I stayed there about 18 days and I decided to come to Canada, even though I didn't know anybody here. And I start to research about Canada and how to cross the border through Google Map. And I flew to Seattle from Kansas City, and from Seattle to Blaine, I went by bus. And from Blaine, I was walking to Canada, to Vancouver. But the road was really, really bushy forest, and I got really hurt. My skin was cutting off and bleeding because of the blackberries. And when I crossed the border, I went to the farmer man, like he was there. And when he saw me, he was freaking out, and he was, I asked him to call the police and contact them to come get me. But he said, it's not a good idea to call the police because they may come and send you back to the to United States. So I had to go to Surrey and look for police, and I get them. They were really nice to me and they were talking to me, but I had to stay in the jail for 2 nights and 3 days. And then after 3 days from the immigration building, they told me that, welcome to Canada. Now you are in Canada. And they give me a motel address to go. That was the most hard part, because when you come out from the immigration building without speaking English, without knowing anybody, it was really, really hard because I didn't even know how to get a taxi. So I was watching people. It was late evening and looking at the people walking, rushing to their home. I felt like I'm a lost cat in a big country. I asked myself, am I starting life again in this country? Am I having home anymore one day? And what about job? What about friends? What about myself? Because I felt like I'm no one anymore. Nobody knows me and nobody close to me. And it was really hard. Only me and my backpack. I left my everything behind. So I was sitting on the street, and a homeless man came to me and he was asking me, why are you crying? And I didn't speak English at that time. And with the body language and some words, I told him that I need a taxi. And he said, okay. He got me a taxi and he said, I am here every day. If you need any help, please come to me. And he offered me a biscuit. He said, I know you're hungry. And he was totally changing my vision about Canada, about my new life, about my new land. I told myself, if the homeless guy that nice, what about the other people? So it was really hard for me for 2 days because I was in the motel, and I didn't know anything. Canada is totally different than my country. The bus system, banking, train, even the street. After 2 days, I found Jordan home and I contacted them. It was really, really relief for me because when I saw them, when I found them, I felt like I'm finding my eyes, my voice again, because they got me house, food, empathy, and they were really, really friendly, and they helped me just like my family. Until now, I feel like I'm having my family here. They taught me how to get SkyTrain, bus, banking, and they got me a lawyer until all my process was finished. and everything I got from them, and that's something that everybody needed when they come to this country, because you come with nothing. You have to start from zero, and somehow you just reborn in a different way. You're reborn with so much pain. And empathy is really, really important for immigrants. Like for me, it was really hard, because really hard to live without my 2 children. What's really so important for us is, as an immigrant, is feeling empathy, as I said. And we need people to hear us, to feel us, to listen to us, because somehow we become storytellers, because we have so much story to talk about. We need to talk about how we were before we had house, we had jobs, we had normal life, but now we have nothing, and we are just like you, without story. Now we don't have any story, so we left our story behind, and we have to talk about our history. And what I get from Journey Home, it was just the things that I need, that I had to talk about. Sometimes I just called Laura. She's one of the Journey Home's member. She used to. I just call her and cry. That's it. I didn't want to talk, and I didn't want to hear anything. I just want to cry. So I'm grateful for having been in Canada. My life is safe right now. I love this country, and I'm looking forward to work and write more about human rights. Right now, I'm permanent resident, and I'm working with a lawyer to bring my children over to Canada. Thanks for listening.
Wow, thank you so much, Kochar. You honor us by being vulnerable and sharing your stories, and so I just thank you for that. And I think what I hear in your story when you tell it is just that how important it is for people who are secure in Canada to come alongside those who are just finding their footing, and to welcome them. So so that's what we're going to talk about now.
Thank you.
And just thank you for that. And yeah, John put in the chat something I was going to also just say, and that is that we are going to have a Q&A at the end of the evening, and you'll have an opportunity to ask any questions that you may want to ask of any of the speakers this evening. You could do that live at the end, or you could put it in the chat, and we'll bring those questions up near the end of the evening. So we're going to move to kind of our 3 ways. That's the title of the seminar this evening, is 3 ways that your church, that we as the church can be ready to welcome refugee claimants like Kochar after the pandemic is finished and the borders open. So the next slide is just kind of going to highlight what those 3 things are. And first, we're going to talk about educate, and we're already doing that tonight. We're hearing stories from people like Kochar. There's an education in that. We're going to talk about how we can then engage, and then finally, we're going to look at how can you be a part of empowering organizations and groups and people who are working with refugee claimants. So our first person speaking to the area of educate is Richard Belcham from Inasmuch Community in Abbotsford, BC. He is the executive director there, and he's got a wonderful British accent, which I always love listening to. Welcome, Richard, and looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you particularly to Kochar, because the power of story and storytelling is so important, and it really is a great link into how we should educate ourselves on who refugee claimants are, and we all have the opportunity, and there's so many resources out there where you can educate yourself, you can find out, you can help your church groups find out who refugee claimants are. And it's when you hear powerful stories like Kochar's and like the many other people who come to Canada, when you hear those stories, that's what changes hearts and minds, and that's what helps people understand how to welcome the stranger. And it links right back to what Mark was saying at the beginning, and he's way more eloquent than I am. And he has a great Australian accent. So we're going around the world in accents, which is great. Really, the best place to start with education is very simple. It's getting the facts. And we've thrown a whole load of statistics at you. And I'm always impressed how Lauren can distill very complex and interesting information with lots of statistics and make it very clear and simple to understand. So I'm a little bit embarrassed to follow on from him because he's such a wealth of knowledge, but I'll give it my best shot. So with the facts, there's some really great places that you can start. The UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, they have global offices and local offices, and they produce a load of statistics and all kinds of materials and stories and marketing things and social media. That's a really good place to start. It's the kind of big global perspective. And then you can bring it a little bit closer to Canada, and there's the Canadian Council for Refugees, and they look after the organizations, many organizations that serve refugees, both pathways, the sponsored refugees as well as refugee claimants. A little bit of a plug for a Metro Vancouver and Fraser Valley based organization, the Multi-Agency Partnership, MATBC. That's an innovative collective of around 50 organizations now who serve refugee claimants, and the focus is on discussing issues that help refugee claimants make processes better, find new ways of doing things, meet together to solve issues around housing, around mental health, around healthcare, and all of these kinds of things. And it's an extraordinary collection of really passionate people. So there's a very good website there. On the website, there's also lots of resources you can follow. There's a great, for want of a better word, myth-busting page, which explains who refugee claimants are and who they're not, and some of the myths that arise in the media. Of course, the Refugee Highway Partnership North America, fantastic umbrella organization, again, bringing people together from this part of the world to discuss these issues. And of course, World Vision and Amnesty International are just two of the big global partnerships and global organizations that deal with refugees and have information. So that's where you can get the facts. That's a really good place to start, to go, this is the issue, these are the numbers, these are some of the technical stuff behind it. And you'll be pleased to know John's put in the chat that we have a PDF that we're going to send you, and you'll be very pleased to see the screenshot there. And that has lots and lots of organizations and, more importantly, live web links. So you'll be able to click on the PDF and it will take you to the different organizations so you can find out more. And so we're going to email that to you. We're also going to email you a PDF with agencies across Canada, particularly ones that are engaged with churches. And thanks to Brad for helping to pull that one together, Lauren too. So that's a really good way of doing it. But you know, one of the simplest things is meeting a need. It's loving a neighbor, and there's many ways that you can educate yourself, and that's sometimes how people start. They meet a need and they realize that these people have come to Canada and they don't know who they are, and that's how it started. I mean, if you look at I'll take In As Much as an example. Our organization started when our founders received a call from the local police to say that someone had, a family from Guatemala had crossed the border and they had nowhere to go, and what should they do? And our founders said, bring them to our house and we'll look after them. And they stayed for 8 weeks, and that's how they learned who refugee claimants are. And now 10 years later, there's this organization that has 2 houses and is working to support refugee claimants in the Fraser Valley. So it's that really simple idea of welcoming the stranger, of giving hospitality, of opening your heart and your hands and saying, come, welcome, you know. So loving your neighbor, it's just a really simple way, but by doing that, you're educating yourself on these great folks and learning about them. And of course, we've talked about storytelling and the importance of storytelling. This is a phrase that I'm very keen on talking about, which is going behind the headlines and the statistics. and researching and understanding who people are. Challenge yourself. When you think that you know something, check the facts. Just Google it. Google the opposite and see what comes up. And that way you'll get to find out how you can help people, what they need. Go to events like this. You're already doing it. So you can check number one of this webinar, because you're already educating yourself. Read books. There's some amazing books out there, Canadian, and then across the world, very famous authors, and then less famous folks. That's a really good way to do it. There's loads of TV programs. If you haven't seen it, watch Stateless on Netflix. It's an extraordinary documentary style docudrama, if you like, based in Australia and some of the issues there. And then, if I may, a shameless plug for listening to their voices. And there's a podcast that I may happen to host called Along the Way Stories, which actually records and tells the stories of folks who have a refugee background. So again, all good ways. Listen, go behind the scenes, go behind the stories, listen to the people, and that way you'll get to know who they are. Start with the kids in your church. That's a great way of doing it. And we've got a little video here from Hamilton. So let me just play that. Let's see if it works. There we are.
Greetings from Hamilton, Ontario. My name is Alison Witt, and I work with the International Association for Refugees Canada. Recently, we've been thinking a lot about children, because kids have a really important role to play in creating a community of belonging for newly arrived refugees. So my idea for how churches can be ready to welcome refugee claimants when our borders reopen is to educate the kids in our churches. Wouldn't it be great for kids to learn about refugee issues in a way that they could understand? And wouldn't it be amazing if kids in churches all across Canada were motivated and eager to befriend children from refugee backgrounds? IAFR Canada has created some brand new materials designed just for them. You can go to our website to download them, and they can easily be used in a Sunday school context, or in a day camp, or even at home with your family. Greetings from Hamilton.
There we are. And then we have another video that I'll just share with you with our friend Lara. She'll introduce herself, and she also has some great ideas for education.
Hello friends, my name is Lara Boros, and I have the privilege of serving on staff at the People's Church. I manage the People's House, an emergency shelter for refugee claimants. And the way we have been equipping our church to welcome the stranger recently is by helping them to see differently, to see through the lenses of God, unlike the world. And so helping them to see God in unexpected places, in unexpected people, and in the stranger, and to welcome them accordingly. May your hearts continue to be encouraged as you love and welcome many. Blessings.
Thank you, Lara.
Hello, friends.
And then finally, it's a question that we're often asked is, why do people seek asylum? What kind of things are they dealing with? And I'd just like to play you a clip of my friend Maya, who actually came to Canada 30 years ago from Iran, and her story is extraordinary. And I'd just like to play you a very short clip, just to give you, we've heard from Kochar, but I'd love you to hear somebody who came a long time ago and her story. So let me just play a clip for you.
My husband and I, we both were political activists fighting with the government of Iran, which is the Republic Islamic of Iran. So we were arrested because we were active. And it's very normal in the countries that there is a dictatorship. They put activists to the jail as soon as they find out about them. And that's how it happened to us. So from the beginning, when they arrested us, they covered our eyes and they put us to the car, and we didn't know, we had no idea where we're going and what gonna happen to us. I was pregnant, 7 months pregnant. They took us to the building that we didn't know where it is, and right away they separated us. I was standing by my feet for hours and hours. and nobody come across to say anything. And because I was pregnant, I needed to go to the washroom and things like that. I was very tired, but anyhow, they took me to the cell. So after a few hours, they took me to interrogations, and they right away they start torturing me physically and emotionally. I could hear my husband next door, he's screaming, and they wanted me to hear that. And he could perhaps hear I'm screaming. And so after that, I stay 2 months in a cell. Then by the time my son was born, they took me to the public area of the jail.
So that's just a little glimpse into the life of Maya, who came 30 years ago, and her story is extraordinary. She's an amazing woman who is incredibly resilient and has smiled her way across the world and through some really terrible things. So all I would say is, if you're looking to educate yourselves and your church groups, there's so many things online, and if you can find people's stories, that's the way that we make those connections. And so as nice as it is to hear an English accent, I would really encourage you to listen to the voices of refugee claimants rather than me. And that's a great introduction to how you can educate people. Brad, over to you.
Thanks, Richard, for leading us through some really practical ways that we can learn. And it was great to hear from some other organizations about how they would suggest that we educate ourselves. I get to cover the topic of how we can engage. And if we go to the next slide, I'm going to share with you some opportunities for individuals to engage, but also church groups or even entire churches, and how can church groups engage as well. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to start with a couple of stories. We're on a theme of stories tonight. So what I want to illustrate here is two stories. One is from a whole church that is engaging, and the other is from an individual family from a church. So 10th Church is a local church here in Vancouver, and I had the opportunity, along with some of my colleagues, to meet with some of their leaders a few years back, and we talked to them about, would you be willing to welcome a family, kind of like a private sponsorship, but a refugee claimant who needs a house, a place to live, and needs a community to support them. And they said, yeah, let's do that. Let's partner together. And they decided, as a church community, we're going to engage and we're going to make this a part of our ministry. I can't tell you the whole story. There's not time. But 5 years later, 10th Church has actually now hired a settlement worker. They work part-time. We still partner together with them. That settlement worker works on our staff, but works with the refugee claimants, who are now 130 strong, 130 refugee claimants that are now being supported and connected through this ministry. That's a story of a church that just said, hey, we can do something, let's engage. And then I want to tell you the story of an individual from Hope City Church who, a couple of years ago, our executive director, James Gurnow, he spoke at the church and just talked about ways to get involved, and was approached by an individual in the church, and she said, I'd like our family to get involved. What can we do? And she and her kids and her husband, they committed to once a month cooking a community dinner at one of the Journey Home houses. And I wanted to illustrate both, because a big response like 10th Church, with major impact, but also a smaller response, an individual, a family, with major impact, helping a group of refugee claimants experience community together through sitting down around a table. The point is, whatever you choose to do, whether it's something large or something small, just engage, and you will make an impact on lives and welcome people. And that's the point. So if we go to the next slide here, I want to just have other people share from their organizations how they want to encourage engagement with their ministries and the things that they do. So these are people that have ideas to share with us and how you can get involved, whether it's through a large response or a small response. So let's listen to some of these responses.
Hi, my name is Catherine Milam, and I'm with the New Canadian Friendship Centre here in Calgary, which is a ministry of Center Street Church. As the borders begin to open and we welcome refugee claimants again, one of the biggest ways we can help is with language learning. And so if your church can start a basic program, that would be helpful. It doesn't need to be fancy, just welcoming. And I know that there are organizations in Calgary for sure that can help churches start up basic programs. As a church or as an individual, you could look for organizations like the Friendship Centre who are already working with refugee claimants and just see how you can volunteer or otherwise support them. You might want to talk with government-funded immigration agencies in your area and see if there are ways that you can volunteer or support them. Often they really want to help refugee claimants but might be restricted just out of funding requirements, and they would love to have a place where they can refer people to. So just a few ideas, pray about it and see what God calls you to do. Be prepared to learn and grow and be blessed. Hi, my name is Catherine Milam.
Keep them rolling, Richard. Just one after the other is great.
Hi friends, my name is Mindy and I live and work here at New Hope Community Services in North Surrey. We are a Christian organization and we own and operate, this is a 13-unit apartment building where refugee families live together in community with Canadian families. And if your church is close by, we would love to have you come by and connect with our community. You can host a community dinner or help tutor English or help a new family settle in or host a different event. We'd love to connect. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, my name's Scott and I work at Micah House Refugee Reception in Hamilton, Ontario. This is a great thing that's happening here right now, and I was asked, what is it something that we could suggest that you could do as a church body in order to support refugees coming into the country? Well, you're going to get lots of creative ideas from lots of people in the ministry that'll really give you inspirational stuff. My suggestions may be going to come from a little left of center. How about how you prepare for that day? Why don't you go out and print up a whole bunch of t-shirts with a message on that, and then circulate those t-shirts, wear those t-shirts on special days, and say it out loud and be proud about it, right? Micah House once had a t-shirt with an outline of Canada. It said, "Everyone's welcome," or something like that. We're big enough for everybody, plenty of room for everybody, something like that. And it was very thought-provoking, got a lot of feedback. Go and do likewise. Hi.
My name is Sam Chase, and I'm the Executive Director of Christie Refugee Welcome Center in Toronto. We provide housing for refugee claimant families. I was a pastor for many years, so I really believe that one of the gifts that a church can offer a newcomer family, refugee claimant families, is the gift of relationships. Churches, even very small churches, have this network of support that can enfold a family and help them figure out how to get settled to life in Canada, take them to doctor's appointments, help them fill out forms, help them figure out the employment system, the job search system. My parents were immigrants, they weren't refugees, but we arrived to a town that had no other Indian families in it at all. And a 50-person Baptist church became what we would call today our settlement agency. So I'd encourage even very small churches, or even just a small group of people in a church, to reach out to a local agency that serves refugees, get to know one another so you develop trust, form a relationship to one another, and then offer the gift of relationship, committed, nearly covenantal kind of relationship to families. Many newcomer families say that years after they arrive in Canada, they had never been inside the home of a family that grew up in Canada. So let's change that as a church.
Great. So there's the summary on the screen there, the things that we heard from these various organizations. of ways that you could engage, whether you're an individual or whether you are a church or whether you're a small group from a church. And I want to highlight a couple of other things that I just want to share. One is you've heard some stories tonight, especially Coach R's story, about when refugee claimants arrive. They don't have a welcoming group, and often they don't know how to get housing. Maybe you have an extra room in your house. Maybe you have a basement suite that you could make available for a cost that could be afforded by a newcomer to Canada. Share space. That's a huge way of engaging, and it is actually such a gift. And then next slide, there's a few other ideas just to share. Some things that happen here in Metro Vancouver. We have volunteers. So this is all about volunteering. And these are just some examples of ways that people volunteer at our organization. And it would be similar for other organizations across Canada. So delivering bread, delivering fresh bread, volunteering at a weekly food hub that that today just happened upstairs. 70 refugee families received a fresh food package today because of volunteers who got together and helped out. And then we have somebody who, a high school student who, when we used to have community dinners and meet together, she would bake cupcakes for us once a month so we could celebrate birthdays for everybody who had a birthday that month. Such simple ideas to engage that make such a great difference to make people feel welcome. So that's what that I'll just finish there in terms of engage. I want to highlight one thing. You guys have stuck with us for just over an hour already. We are getting close to being finished. We're almost there, and stick with us because actually Mark's book, we have a couple that we're going to do a little draw for. And if you stick with us and you're here to the end, you're going to have a chance to win a really great educational opportunity through Mark's book. So so stick with us. We're hope you're enjoying this evening. And I want to just move to our last section, which Lauren is going to lead us through, which is Empower.
Right. Well, so Empower, it really hangs on Engage and Educate. It's both. It's really bringing the strength you have to the strength that's already in motion. And so this is the welcome of people who are forcibly displaced seeking refugee protection in Canada is shared work. And so how can we pull weight together? I'm really delighted to have Jonathan Bayless join us this evening. Jonathan is, well, he'll tell a bit of his own story, but what he represents is a man who's lives largely, and he's connected to a church that lives largely as well. And St. John's Vancouver has been working together, like co-carrying the weight with Journey Home and with Kinbrace. And so I've asked Jonathan a few prompter questions, and maybe Jonathan, I'll just rattle them off and you can repeat them as you speak. But I asked, what inspired you in your church to support refugee claimants? I asked for a story of their own engagement directly with refugee claimants. And then how have they helped build the capacity for organizations already in motion like Kinbrace and Journey Home? And then the most important thing they have learned as a church community. So turn it right over to you, Jonathan. Thank you for sharing your time with us this evening.
Well, thank you. I'm going to try to speak to those questions and also bring you directly the voices of some of our volunteers, if I can do that in 5 minutes, so I'll try. So it starts out, what inspired you in your church? Because Abraham, Joseph, and his whole family, Moses, and Jesus himself, were all displaced people. It is in our DNA as Jesus followers to welcome the sojourner or newcomer. I was raised in a family that included international students in social gatherings. Growing up with internationals, I realized two surprising things. First of all, you didn't have to go overseas to spread the gospel to people of all different cultures because our cities were chock full of international students, immigrants, and refugees. And secondly, that reaching out to displaced people benefited me at least as much as it did them. For example, when I was 14, I was in the mountains with some international students, And I learned downhill skiing from 2 Egyptian students. Many St. John's Vancouver parishioners share this awareness. My role is to connect our members with opportunities to welcome refugees. In 2016, I set out to partner with Kinbrace in the Journey Home community. I quickly learned that we in Vancouver are exceptionally blessed to have these 2 agencies to introduce us to displaced people and leverage our small efforts into life-changing actions. The story. At a dinner one Tuesday evening at Kinbrace, my wife Lorraine and I met Shamal and Shonim and their baby daughter Alina, a young Kurdish family from northern Iraq. Shamal had worked for a US company and so was targeted for death by ISIS. They had to quickly leave the family home that they had actually built themselves and flee the country. They made it to Turkey. From there, they made it into the eastern US. They found no welcome there, or way to live, and made their way to Blaine, Washington, from where they walked across the Peace Arch Park to safety in Canada. After several adventurous days in Vancouver, including sleeping under a bridge, they discovered Kinbrace and were welcomed to a safe home. We got to know this little family and introduced them to friends at St. John's who worked together to find them permanent housing and all the necessities of life. Lorraine and I will never forget the emotions on the evening when we introduced Shamal, Shonim, and Alina to the couple that welcomed them into their basement suite. To this day, we don't know who was more thrilled, the refugees or the hosts. They were all thrilled. It was a mutually exciting time we'll never forget. We introduced Shamal, Shonim, and Alina to many people in the church, some of whom became close friends, others formed the larger friend group that we all need. One dear lady spent every Friday afternoon with Shonim, visiting and teaching her to knit. Others hosted lunches, dinners, parties, celebrations for birthdays, and other occasions at which they made new friends. Shamal was a great storyteller. People were spellbound listening to the tale of their harrowing escape and struggles along the way. Example of the Ride for Refuge. Every year, the Refugee Committee member Callan Fong Lung and I each lead a team to ride or walk on the Ride for Refuge to raise funds and awareness for Kinbrace and Journey Home community. Callan is very good at fundraising, and I'm good at riding a bicycle. I know without a doubt that the small effort that we make while having fun on the ride gets magnified to do great things at Kinbrace and Journey Home. Most important thing we've learned, enfolding newcomers and people who are alone is and always has been a characteristic of God's people. It's built into our DNA, as I said. In the surprising ways of God, we discover that our friendships with displaced people not only helps them, but significantly enriches our lives. We actually receive more than we give. Let me just read. We have a refugee welcome team at St. John's that now numbers over 80 people. From Kathy Snyder-Lowe, to spend time with refugee families is to feel both humbled and filled with admiration. For me, sharing physical resources and volunteering time to come alongside when a need is made known is simply an opportunity to put my faith into action. From Kathy Manson, my experience in being part of the Refugee Committee has brought me a wealth of joy and has provided a lens of truth, honesty, and the love and power of Christ. It has not only given me an opportunity to grow in my own Christian faith, but to witness the resilience, determination, strength, wisdom, and pure grit of these precious people, refugees, whom I am privileged to call my family and friends. They live out Christ, no question. It is they who have taught me. I can only hope I have the Christ-like impact on them that they have had on me. From Ann Barker, I helped out by taking children to and from school on a weekly basis. It was a delight to spend time with Arsham and Marva. The family is so warm, welcoming, and accepting of me, a perfect stranger. Both children are so polite. Helping this family has been a blessing to me. From Isabel Austin, I have been blessed to reach out in small ways, provide a safe haven for 2 children, allowing their mother to pursue English studies. What a joy to share for a few hours in the lives of youngsters experiencing tears, laughter, exuberance, playing in the swings, especially in the snow. which was brand new. Watching the huge challenges facing the family and their courage and tenacity in moving forward is a huge privilege, and so is providing a listening ear, encouragement, and a little bit of help. From Chris and Kristen Prabhakar, we have been involved in getting to know one or two families. We have enjoyed having them over for dinner and celebrating special occasions. We've also enjoyed going on a hike. Overall, our experience getting to know refugees has been very positive and meaningful. One more from Beth Allen. I think the biggest thing that I have appreciated about our family, refugee family, is their openness to receive me, a complete stranger. I have learned about courage from this family. They have had to face things from the past that have threatened their well-being in Canada. I'm staggered to think of the mental fortitude required to accommodate the changes that this family has had to make. A willingness to be open to the community of St. John's and friends who came alongside to help, and their sharing of what it's been difficult for them, but also of their hopes and dreams for the future has endeared this family to me and to others. These are just some of our volunteers. One last question. What is on your horizon? Me, I very much look forward to the restoration of in-person gatherings at church and in people's homes where we can enfold our new Canadians into the community of friends. I dream of a day when it becomes normal and expected that social and family gatherings include formerly displaced people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. You packed a lot of wisdom and experience and storytelling into that. And Jonathan will join us at the end for questions. He's a real life guy to talk to and a personal mentor for me. So just to wrap up, maybe put the last couple slides on here. So ways to empower, just come alongside. Prayer is the great mystery, being in touch with the relational God who cares for all, particularly those who are displaced. If you need a guest speaker in your church, we're all ready to speak, to preach. Become a board member of one of these organizations, looking for all sorts, marketing backgrounds, finance skills, business minds, development. Some of us are heading into some building. So all sorts of needs there. Expanding the housing network, you've heard about basements opening up or a room. This is a profound way to not only eat meals together, but provide the shelter that's needed. And then you can fundraise. The Ride for Refuge has been mentioned, a great way to build a team and really build that deep capacity that's needed for a warm welcome. I'll just close off with the last slide. The three organizations represented tonight have program areas that are designed to build capacity in the wider community. Welcome Homes is an initiative of Inasmuch. Tammy Johnson is the contact. You'll get all these details. Communities of Welcome, Journey Homes initiative led by Vanessa Roth. And Beyond Refuge is Kinbrace's initiative led by Wilfred Thariki. So these are, there's live people out there that you can connect with and ask your questions to, and there's developing training that's sort of goes deeper, a lot deeper than tonight's training for you. Brad, I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thanks, Lauren. Appreciate everything you shared, and Jonathan as well. Thank you so much for being involved and for helping organizations like Journey Home and Kinbrace to do the work that we do. Thank you so much. Actually, I'm going to turn it over to back to John Hall, because that is the end of our formal presentation, but we do want to leave an opportunity for discussion and questions, and I think John is going to lead us in that.
Yeah, that's great. So Lauren, if you could take the slide down, that'd be helpful. And I would just encourage folks to put your questions in the chat right now. And I'm going to bring up some folks onto the screen. We've got Jonathan and Lauren and whoops, and sorry, Jonathan and Lauren, Richard, and is Kochar joining us as well? Great.
Yes,
So
she will, yeah.
if you wanted to address your questions to any of these folks, it'd be great. And Mark, are you still on the call?
Yeah, I'm here.
Excellent. So Mark could take a question as well. So these are the folks that have been doing most of the presenting tonight. And if you have a question, please just put your question in the chat. I have a question to kick us off, actually. And the question that I have is, are there financial resources for refugee claimants that are coming into Canada?
I can jump in on that one. Yes, but not immediately. So most refugee claimants that come to Canada expend all of their resources just to get here, and often arrive, as you heard in Kochar's story, with little more than maybe a backpack. It takes a little bit of time working through submitting their documentation, their application for asylum. It's called a basis of their refugee claim documents, all those kinds of things, until they can get an acknowledgement that they've made a refugee claim and ID that enables them to begin applying for resources in Canada, including, very thankfully, provincial welfare is available to refugee claimants. And so once they have that, which could take a month, sometimes 2 months, depending on how tricky that process is to get income assistance set up, until then they need help and they need support from organizations and churches and groups, just to maybe have food security and basic needs met. But then eventually they can begin to function with some resourcing that is available to them.
That's great, thank you. So I guess I have a follow-up question now as well. So on average, have you guys discovered how long it takes for somebody who's entered Canada as a refugee claimant to actually connect with some type of support system within the country? Through the stories we've heard tonight, I've heard things like 2 days and a few days. Is that pretty normal, or can it be longer?
I can jump into that one. It can be longer, it can be shorter. Some people are very fortunate to get connected very quickly to an organization. Others, it can take a lot longer. I think of a guy I worked with who came across the border and ended up in a shelter in the downtown east side, where he didn't have great experience, and he ended up going to a shelter in Mission. And it was only much later, like 6-7 months before he got connected, when a shelter worker realized that he was a refugee claimant and could make that connection. So some people are very fortunate and get connected very quickly, others take a lot longer. And one of the things that the multi-agency partnership is putting in place, with some funding from the BC government, is a dedicated website for refugee claimants to deal with their initial needs, because some people don't have a cell phone, or they can't get Wi-Fi, or they don't. I mean, for example, how would you know that you can get free live Wi-Fi at the library if you've never lived in Vancouver or had never been to the library? So trying to get people connected to a settlement agency or transition housing or support is something that we're very keen on doing and developing, and to shorten that time so as quickly as possible. So when Kochar was talking about how she got to the immigration department to make her claim, we really want to make sure that that connection happens then, so she's not just put out onto the street and has nowhere to go. So a long answer to a quick question was, it can be short time, it can be a long time, but all the organizations are working to make it as short as possible, to get the support to people as quickly as possible.
That's great. Good. Thank you. Does anybody have a question? If you do and you don't want to type, you could just unmute yourself and ask the question, but direct it to a person in particular, unlike what I've been doing. And we'd encourage you to just stick around for a few more minutes because we're going to announce the winners of the book draw for Mark and Luke's book, Refuge Reimagined, in just a few minutes. But does anybody have a question?
I have a question.
Hi, Yvonne.
How are you?
Good.
The organizations represented here tonight connected with Immigrant Services in Vancouver and Mosaic. Do you have partnerships with them?
Yes, we do. We all have slightly different relationships, but yes, they're very key to all of our organizations, and we connect with them regularly, some in a formal partnership and some in an informal partnership. Yeah. There's a question that's come in from Darlene in Calgary for you, Kochar. It says, do you, and feel free to decline to answer if you don't want to, but do you have regular communication with your children in your home country? The person who's asking wasn't sure about communications there.
In the beginning, actually, I didn't have good communication with them because I felt like they are insecure and their life will be dangerous, and they are living with my ex-husband's family. They didn't let me to talk to them until like last 2 years. I talked to them, but very like maybe twice a month or every 2 weeks. But right now I'm in a good communication with my son, but my daughter, she's more cold with me because she's always blaming me that I left her and it was my fault. That's where she thinks. I hope one day she will understand about that. But physically, when you're not with them, there is something is gonna break in between you and them, and they don't understand. Like they need physical love. Like when you chat with them or you talk on the phone, they don't get the real love from you. So, yeah.
Thank you, Kochar.
You're welcome.
So we have another question from Anna Bryant asking how Ride for Refuge works. Maybe somebody would like to take that.
Brad, why don't you? And then maybe Jonathan can add his commentary.
Sure. So the Ride for Refuge is a cross-Canada fundraising event for charities that work with people who have experienced they need refuge, they need support. So so the way it works is you form a team or you join a team in support of a charity that is registered as a participant in the Ride for Refuge. And I know Kinbrace and Journey Home were both participants, and then I think some of the organizations on that resource that you will see are also participants in the Ride for Refuge. And then you do your ride, and this year it's called freestyle. You can actually do all kinds of different things. You don't just have to ride your bike. And if you have questions about how to do Ride for Refuge, you could certainly reach out to me, and I'd be happy to connect you. But then, yeah, Jonathan, maybe you have as an expert captain for Ride for Refuge, maybe you could explain what it's like.
Well, it's all kind of handled through the website. There's a Ride for Refuge Vancouver website, and you can sign up as a captain, and then you invite your friends and anybody who you think might be interested in going with you. And before the pandemic, there was a great big gathering before and after, and you had lunch after. And last year was really interesting. We kind of set up our own little route to ride. I like to ride the long one because I love cycling, and my kids do as well. So we ride 50K, and we meet up at a certain place, and just you hope it's not raining that day, but if it is, you just ride anyway. People ask you questions. You can get people involved who may not already know about the organization, but just like to ride bicycles. Some people prefer to walk, or I think they can even do other things like, I think someone last year, it was Callan's daughter actually, who did music and sold CDs of her classical piano. Anyway, just a great organization, and it's lots of fun. And somehow or other, I think we do raise a bit of money.
I'll add one thing to that, Anna. You ask about can the church get excited about it? It is a wonderful way, actually. Educate, engage, empower. Like all these things are all tied into it, and a great awareness raising for those who are participating, and then the network of donors that become part of that story as well. So it's a very effective way to and pointed way to get involved in a very meaningful way.
Thank you. That is helpful. James, do you want to go ahead with your question? And then I think we're going to wrap it up. Actually, before you go, James, I just wanted to clarify with Brad. Brad, on the PDF of resources we're going to be giving out, does it describe in greater detail what that children's resource is that was referenced?
It doesn't specifically speak to it, but it does highlight the IAFR International Association for Refugees website. And so all of the resources that they produce for churches are shared through their website. So you'll see that link on the resource.
That's great. James, go ahead.
I think Richard kind of spoke to it a little bit already, and the question's still kind of forming in my mind. But like, I wonder, kind of, for Kochar's kind of experience, or others, like, kind of how kind of there is kind of to shorten that gap between someone arriving and someone beginning to kind of find assistance in the community. Like, is some of that breakdown, I mean, I imagine it's many factors, but a lack of awareness of what is there, but maybe even a lack of resources as well. Like, I guess I'm from Toronto, and I know that for the church that we attend, they do get kind of calls from the airport to say, do you have space? And if they get calls regularly, then there's limited space. But kind of what are some of those kind of challenges or even bottlenecks in shortening that critical period where someone is just not sure what to do and doesn't know where to start?
There's a couple of things that that you highlight that are when you come as a newcomer to a new country anyway, it's a big challenge to just navigate the systems and to learn how things are different. I mean, that's true even coming from England. When I came, I couldn't work out the money, and I used to spend ages looking at the coins going, well, I wonder how much that one is and how much that one is. And so there's those kinds of things that you just have to navigate as a newcomer, and it just takes time. So that's one thing. The other thing is how you connect with the settlement services and how you connect with housing. And because refugee claimants can come in all different directions and come from all different directions, over the border, through the airport, over land, over sea, by car, there's all kinds of ways people come. And so the first person they connect with might be the CBSA, it might be, as Kochar mentioned, the IRCC, it might be a homeless shelter, it might be a church. There's all kinds of ways. And so when you have a couple of systems in place, like the website that I mentioned, but also a housing referral system that's being built right now, to take some of that pain away, so it becomes much more seamless. And so the CBSA or the IRCC or whoever know that there's one website that has one referral, and once you've gone to that, you're then in the system. So you highlight all the systemic gaps. I'm thankful in BC there's some very talented and very wonderful people who are working diligently to close some of those gaps.
That's excellent. Thank you. I'm sure there's a lot more to say about all of these topics, and just to encourage everybody, these guys aren't very hard to find. Brad, Richard, and Lauren can be contacted through their respective organizations. And I'm sure if there are additional questions for Jonathan or Kochar or Mark, we can get those questions to them as well. And I'd like to thank everybody for coming out. As mentioned, we were going to do a book draw for Mark's book, and the two winners that we have are Sandra DeLeo and Pauline Kitzlick. And so we will be able to send you a book. I'll be in contact by email to get your address, and it'll show up on your doorstep. So thank you. You guys are the winners of Refuge Reimagined, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. It's really good. We want to dismiss you now. You're free to go, but we can stick around for a few more questions. In fact, I've got a doozy waiting for Mark. If you guys want to stick around to hear it, you're welcome to. If not, thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming out to this seminar presented by Mission Central. We really appreciate your time. And thank you to all of our presenters. And I wish I could hear the applause, but yeah, thank you. So here's my question, Mark. And I think it intersects with Coach R's story. And so I don't want to keep us too long, but I do want to ask this question. How does Canada's foreign policy intersect with the journey of refugee claimants to Canada? And kind of related to that, I guess, is if Mark, I don't know if you know that. I guess that's more of a question for Luke, but you know, I figure you guys have talked about this often enough. You must have some insights. And then Coach R, I guess that kind of must have had some impact. Like, why did Canada come up on your radar in terms of thinking about a place to go? But Mark?
Sure. Well, I think maybe if I give it 1 minute and then I'll throw to Lauren to give it 1 minute. Because Lauren, I'm an Aussie, and so I kind of straddle Canada, Australia, and also the US in terms of policy. But I think that, I mean, as Lauren said, Canada has had a checkered history like any country. It's been warmly welcoming sometimes. It's different from Australia. It's different from the US in that it doesn't have a porous border. Of course, President Biden comes into office and all of a sudden he has to think very hard about immigration at the US-Mexican border, and immediately that affects his politics. It puts vast pressure on him as a Democratic president, and he has to enact policy almost immediately regarding refugees and immigrants, and the whole thing becomes very complicated. Canadian presidents don't have quite the same pressure, hey? Because people would have the option of making a refugee claim in the US, because it's much more difficult to get to by boat, even in a country like Australia. There's that buffer, perhaps, for Canada to be more reflective and to live into its human rights charter and just to be a bit more poised. That's very fortunate for Canadian leaders. Sometimes I wonder if Canada didn't have that buffer of the water and the border with the US, of the water and the border with the US, perhaps Canada would be just as selfish, if I may, as Australia, where I come from. We have a terrible, unfortunately, refugee policy of offshore detention for those who arrive by boat. But so, I mean, I think we celebrate the generosity we see in Canada, but we have to realize that we in Canada are human, just like Australians and Iraqis and Iranian politicians, and we're all capable of great compassion and also of selfishness. And yeah, I mean, as I tried to unfold, that the Bible calls us to a really reflective posture of embracing people who are on the move as family. Let me throw it to you, Lauren, though, because I've only been in Canada for 10 years, so what are your reflections?
Well, I would agree with you that we have a remarkable opportunity in Canada. We do have the space literally to think and imagine and create. We're an incredibly rich country. resource-wise, we're rich in our DNA. Those of us who are settlers, Canada's made up with a lot of people who've lived the displacement story. My own ancestors have that story. And so it's remembering that provides a great platform. So I say, let's make hay while the sun shines. If we have this remarkable opportunity, let's create the very best offers for people who are forcibly displaced, and then let that be an emblem to the rest of the world. And indeed, our inland refugee determination system that's overseen by Canada's largest independent tribunal, the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada, its determination system is a exemplar for the rest of the world in terms of how we process refugee claims. That said, we have migration control mechanisms and strategies that go far beyond our border, way into other countries, to hold people back from getting to Canada. And so there's, on the one hand, we're seeking to amplify our generosity. On the other hand, we as Canadians are also very strategic in how we keep people out of our country. That's dark work. It's I wouldn't want that job, put it that way. It doesn't fit and vibrate with my soul. So yeah, it's that mixed bag that Mark spoke to.
Yeah, thank you.
Coacher as well, John, you mentioned might have a comment.
Yeah, I was curious, Coach, why Canada? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. In my research, I felt like Canada is way better for family and children and women. And because it's a multicultural country, so I won't be a black sheep there. So, and I felt like it's more warming and welcoming because I heard about Canada, but I didn't feel that in United States. I didn't have this connection in America. So yeah, that was, and nature. I love nature. So that's a big reason.
That's great. Thank you. So I think it's really obvious that we have something to guard as well as Canadian citizens, that we really have to think about how Canada is portrayed on the global stage too. I think we're probably at a point where we want to wrap things up, but thank you again, everybody, for joining us and for taking the time. If there are additional questions, you can fire them off to me if you can't get a hold of the other folks who are on this call. And you can find my email address at Mission Central. Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Have a good
That was
night.
great.
Yeah,
I really
thank
enjoyed
you.
it. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Everyone.
Co-chair,
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so
Take
much,
care.
guys. Thanks for having me tonight.
co-chair,
Thank you.
have
Thank
you
you.
met Shanka yet?
Shanga?
Shanka? Yes.
Yes, I know her. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm so glad.
Yeah, she's great.
She's our good friend.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I'm glad
So
I
we're
did.
glad to meet you tonight.
Oh, very nice to meet you.
Yes.
Yeah. You can contact me through my email. You can get it from Brad or
Okay.
I
Good.
can leave it in the chat if you want.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna disconnect. See you guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Jonathan.